Hi, thank you for coming tonight. My name is Linda Seeley. I'm one of the spokespersons for San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace. I'd like all the members of Mothers for Peace to stand up, please. Yay! Thank you all for coming tonight. This is the first in a series of 3 presentations that we'll be making. The next one will be November 10th, and after that, January 19th. And they'll be on 3 different aspects of the waste that's stored at Diablo Canyon. This is not a forum, it's not an anti-nuclear forum, it's not a pro-nuclear forum, it's a factual forum about what we have there and what we're dealing with and what this community is going to have to talk about and consider and make very, very careful choices about for the future of this community and really for all of California. So this is our first attempt, and second and third are going to be just as good and just as informative about different topics.
Tonight you're going to hear me talk a lot about spent fuel. That term may make you think that, oh, it's spent, it's done, it's harmless. Well, actually, the opposite is true. The spent fuel that comes out of the reactor is much, much more radioactive than it was when it went in. And this is why we have the problems we have today. And it is truly the most toxic and long-lived poison that we humans make. Before I begin this presentation, I just want to make one thing clear. There is no safe way to store this waste. After over half a century, countless hours of research, and millions of taxpayer dollars, there is still no definitive solution as how to deal with this waste. All we can do at this point is to find and insist upon the very safest method available. So, to begin, what is radioactive waste? The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, defines radioactive waste this way. Radioactive or nuclear waste is a byproduct from nuclear reactors, fuel processing plants, hospitals and research facilities, and also weapons manufacturing. Radioactive waste is also generated while decommissioning and dismantling nuclear reactors and other nuclear facilities. Fuel for commercial nuclear reactors is typically made from low-enriched uranium fashioned into thumbnail-sized ceramic pellets of uranium dioxide. These pellets are fitted into 12 to 15-foot hollow rods referred to as cladding, which are made of a zirconium alloy. The rods are then bound together into a larger assembly. A typical reactor holds about 200 to 800 fuel assemblies. And before the rods are used, they are only slightly radioactive, and they can be handled without special shielding. The uranium in the assemblies undergoes fission, which is a process of splitting atoms into fragments and neutrons that are then bombard other atoms, resulting in additional fission reactions and a sustainable chain reaction that creates enormous amounts of heat and radioactivity in the form of radioisotopes or radioactive substances. The heat is used to generate steam, to turn a turbine, which generates electricity. And we all know the saying is that nuclear power is the most dangerous and most costly way to boil water on the planet. During the fission process, 2 things happen to the uranium. in the fuel, first uranium atoms split, creating energy that's used to produce electricity. The fission creates radioactive isotopes of lighter elements such as cesium-137 and strontium-90. These isotopes account for most of the heat and penetrating radiation in high-level waste. Second, some uranium atoms capture neutrons during fission. These atoms form heavier elements such as plutonium. These heavier than uranium or transuranic elements do not produce nearly the amount of heat or penetrating radiation that fission products do, but they take much longer to decay. Transuranic waste, also called TRU, account for most of the radioactive hazard remaining in high-level waste after 1,000 years. Radioactive isotopes eventually decay or disintegrate to harmless materials. Some isotopes decay in hours or even minutes, but others decay very slowly. Strontium-90 and cesium-137, for instance, have half-lives of about 30 years, which means half of the radioactivity will decay in 30 years. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,000 years. All of these radioactive isotopes have the capacity to severely affect and destroy DNA, causing disease, illness. Iodine-131, for instance, concentrates in the thyroid, causing thyroid cancer. People are contaminated with it by drinking milk. The cows have eaten contaminated grass. It also affects the ovaries, which causes birth defects, mutations, and miscarriages. Strontium-90 mimics calcium, so it goes straight to the bone. And it can cause leukemia, and it is most dangerous for pregnant women and fetuses. Cesium-137's half-life of about 30 years is long enough that objects and regions contaminated by cesium-137 remain dangerous to humans for a generation or more. But it is short enough to ensure that even relatively small quantities of cesium-137 release dangerous doses of radiation. Plutonium-239 emits alpha radiation. It is highly toxic as well as long-lived. One microscopic speck in the lung will cause lung cancer. Once it enters your body, it will never leave. So each of Diablo Canyon's 2 reactor units are refueled about every 18 months. Once a reactor core has gone critical, meaning it has been used during a reactor operation, highly radioactive nuclear fission products have formed in the core, and the core has become highly radioactive. Refueling involves taking the expended core out of the reactor and putting in a new core with fresh nuclear fuel. When reactor operators first remove spent fuel from a reactor, it is thermally hot and intensely radioactive and must be immersed in deep pools of water, which cools the spent fuel and shields the environment from the spent fuel. These are called spent fuel pools. The spent fuel pool at Diablo Canyon is in an in-ground pool covered by a large metal building, and that is the rectangular building just this side of the domes. That is where the spent fuel pools are housed. Now, water loss in the spent fuel pool could lead to a catastrophic spent fuel pool fire. Water could be lost from a spent fuel pool through leakage, boiling, siphoning, pumping, displacement of objects falling into the pool, or overturning of the pool. These modes of water loss could arise from events, alone or in combination, that include acts of malice or terrorism by persons within or outside the plant, an accidental aircraft impact, an earthquake, dropping of a fuel cask, accidental fire or explosions, and a severe accident in the adjacent reactor, which, through the spread of radioactive material and other influences, affects the ongoing cooling and/or water makeup of the pool. If the fuel were exposed to air and steam, the zirconium cladding would react exothermically, catching fire at about 800 degrees Celsius. This type of fire is almost impossible to extinguish. This image captures the spread of radioactivity from a hypothetical fire in a high-density spent fuel pool at the Peach Bottom Nuclear Power Plant in Pennsylvania. Imagine, if you will, that plume extending away from Diablo Canyon. Of great concern is the large amount of cesium-137 that is contained in the pools. That can be anywhere from 20 to 50 million curies of this dangerous isotope. With a half-life of 30 years, cesium-137 gives off highly penetrating radiation and is absorbed in the food chain as if it were potassium. As much as 100% of the pool's cesium-137 would be released into the environment if there were a spent fuel fire, according to the NRC. Spent nuclear fuel typically must remain in a pool for at least 5 years to decay enough to remain within the heat limits currently allowed for dry cask storage systems. When spent fuel is discharged from a reactor at a plant where the spent fuel pool is at maximum capacity, spent fuel equal to the amount of the spent fuel discharged from the reactor must be transferred to dry storage. The dry storage systems typically consist either of a Thickwall bolted steel vertical cask or a welded steel canister inside a vertical or horizontal steel reinforced concrete cask, and that's what they have at Diablo. To transfer spent fuel to dry storage, reactor operators place a steel canister inside a larger steel transfer cask and lower both into a pool. Spent nuclear fuel is loaded into the canister, a lid is placed on the canister, and then both the canister and transfer cask are removed from the pool. The transfer cask shields nearby workers from the radiation produced by the spent fuel in the canister. The water is drained and a lid is welded onto the canister. Then the canister and the transfer cask are aligned with a storage cask, and the canister is maneuvered into the storage cask. A lot of room for human error there. And that transfer cask can be reused. So Diablo Canyon is currently using on-site dry cask storage. And as you will notice, especially up in the center there, that they're in the open, bolted to a concrete pad with no protection from acts of malice or terrorism, accidental aircraft impact, or other catastrophic events. At Diablo Canyon, at least the dry cask storage is uphill from the plant and a pretty great distance away from the ocean. At San Onofre, it's just inches above the water line and about 100 feet away from the ocean. So isn't there a better way? You may be asking. Yes, there is. Hardened on-site storage, or HOS, allows waste generators to store high-level waste as close to the site of generation as possible, thereby exposing fewer people to radiation as safely as possible. Rather than storing dozens of vulnerable dry casks next to each other in the open air, the HOS principles, established by concerned citizen mandate, Irradiated fuel must be stored as safely as possible, as close to the site of generation as possible. Host facilities must not be regarded as permanent waste storage and thus should not be constructed underground, and the waste must be retrievable. The facility must have real-time radiation and heat monitoring for early detection of problems with containers. The overall objective of HOS should be that the amount of releases projected in even severe attacks should be low enough that the storage system would be unattractive as a terrorist target. And placement of the individual canisters should be placed so that they're difficult to detect from outside of the area. And in Germany, they have interim storage of their waste, which is in what are called monitored retrievable storage systems. These buildings were originally designed to provide additional radiation shielding beyond that was provided by the cask itself, to reduce doses at plant site boundaries to background levels. Some of these buildings are sufficiently robust to provide protection against crashes of aircraft. The casks are able to be continually monitored and can be repaired robotically, and any leaks or other release of radioactivity would be contained in the building. We in San Luis Obispo County are not the only ones dealing with this issue. There are nuclear power plants that have been closed for quite a while, like Humboldt and Rancho Seco. There are nuclear power plants that have recently closed, such as San Onofre, Vermont Yankee, Fort Calhoun. And there are nuclear power plants that are scheduled to close, such as Diablo Canyon. Each and every one of these facilities have produced thousands of tons of nuclear waste that will have to be kept isolated from the environment, and all have tough decisions to make about how to do so in the safest manner possible. The big question remains, how will this waste be safely stored? Isolated from the environment for thousands of years. Is there a final answer? At this time, there is well over 76,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel that has been produced by nuclear power plants nationwide. And the inventory is increasing by about 2,200 metric tons a year. In addition, nuclear weapons production and other defense-related activities have resulted in about 13,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel and other high-level waste. This high-level waste is extremely radioactive and needs to be isolated and shielded to protect human health and the environment. It is currently being stored primarily at sites where it was generated, like Diablo Canyon. After spending decades and billions of taxpayer dollars to research potential sites for a permanent disposal site, including the Yucca Mountain site in Nevada, the nation remains without a repository for disposal, and future projects are unclear. They are trying to revive Yucca Mountain, and that's what we will be talking about next time. It is clear that we have a lot of work to do in order to protect our coastline, ourselves, and our future generations from the nuclear waste that will be left behind when Diablo Canyon closes. What we are left with are a lot of questions and a lot of work to do. So I am now pleased to introduce to you Donna Gilmore of San Onofre Safety. She has done an incredible amount of research into the casks that are used in dry cask storage, as well as in other safety issues at nuclear power plants. Her website, sanonofresafety.org, is used around the world by journalists, engineers, elected officials, regulators, and the general public for creditable information on nuclear safety issues. Donna?
Thank you. Thanks. My background is in systems analysis, major computer systems, mission critical systems, that require redundancy and huge consequences if there are mistakes. So I live 5 miles from San Onofre, and I assumed, which you never do as an analyst, but I did, that if there would be redundancy, rewards for employees that found safety problems, and a government agency that was doing their job to make sure that the industry was doing their job. I actually assumed all that, okay? And then I'm sitting in my backyard, enjoying the good life in San Clemente, reading the local paper, perfect weather there, just like here. And it says, Southern California Edison is firing employees for reporting safety problems to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Now, my first thought is maybe these are just disgruntled employees or something. I couldn't believe what I was reading. So I went to my first NRC meeting, and I learned that it's true, that they actually had the worst safety record in the entire country. And I'm going to be showing you more of that. So I have basically switched gears and become involved first in the shutdown effort to shut down San Onofre, which we were successful at that. It took a team of people and some heavy-duty donors in Laguna Beach, but that was successful. And then I said, well, if they mismanage the plant so bad, what are they doing with that waste? So then I learned that the waste problem is as bad or worse than the reactor. So let's get on with the show. Oh, was this my first slide? Okay. So we took San Onofre off of this because they're closed. So these are active reactors. And the red bar on the left, those are the number of safety complaints from employees to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for things that the employees tried to get their bosses to take care of that they didn't take care of. So, and employees that complain to the NRC risk their job because they get retaliated against for doing this, okay? So these are not things to be taken lightly. So they have one of the worst records in the whole country. All these others are all the other nuclear plants in the country. So when PG&E tells you they put safety first, show any elected official this chart. And this is NRC data. At the bottom, you'll see a link to Nuclear Regulatory Commission system. This is all statistics from the NRC that I put in a visible chart. This worked very effectively in Southern California. Republicans, Democrats, it didn't matter. You show them this chart with credible data, and it's really helpful. So go to the next slide. Okay, this is the location of where those waste cans are, in that circle there. Go to the next slide. And look at how close it is to all that water, okay? Salt water is highly corrosive to stainless steel, which is what these canisters are, the fuel is stored in. It's stored in stainless steel containers that are only a ½ inch thick, okay? Go to the next slide. So this is a close-up picture of the canisters loaded there. Go to the next slide. Yeah, you already saw this picture. This is so skip that because you covered it the last one. This is not one of the Diablo ones, but it's close. See, that's just ½ inch thick, and the fuel assemblies go into those slots, and they call that a basket. I'll be mentioning that later, but it's only a ½ inch thick. And they tend to hide this information from you, from elected officials and everyone else, the fact that it's that thin. Go to the next slide. Okay, what I learned about these canisters, I listened into an NRC technical meeting where they talk about their problems, and they in that meeting said that they cannot inspect them inside or out. They've discovered that they can crack from salt air. Who would think? Metal and salt? Who would have think? Who lives by the ocean here, Okay? And and the kicker is they have no way to inspect. These canisters are not safe to get next to with just this thin stainless steel. They put them in the concrete, thick concrete cast. But there's air vents in the top, there's one in the bottom, there's one in the top. There's air vents so the canister gets convection cooling, otherwise it would overheat. So the only thing protecting us from a major radiation release is a 1/2-inch piece of stainless steel, okay? And they have no way, they have no technology to find cracks. The NRC said once a crack starts, it takes 16 years and it will grow on its own through the wall of the canister. And the president of Holtec that makes the Diablo canisters, we have him on video saying that even a microscopic through-wall crack will release millions of curies of radionuclides into the environment. And in the face of that, if you could figure out a way to repair them, wouldn't even be feasible, because it just introduces another area for corrosion. So this is what they've given us. So if you can't inspect, you can't repair. There's federal regulations. You cannot transport with even partial cracks for everybody. So everybody that wants us out of here, they have no way to know if there's cracks. They know they're susceptible to cracks. And also the canisters are welded shut, so you don't know what's going on inside with the fuel or the baskets. So they really aren't transportable in this system. And a partially cracked canister has no seismic rating. You know, PG&E talks about, well, these are safe. We've got this really high seismic rating, but they don't mention if you have partial cracks, there's no rating for that. So in essence, as far as we know, there is 0 seismic rating, okay? And go back again. Now, would you buy a car like this? What is a very effective way to talk to people, and we did this with Daryl Issa, who's my representative, his chief of staff down there. We said, would you buy a car that you couldn't inspect, repair, maintain, and gave you no warning before something major failed? Would you buy that car? You don't need to be a nuclear engineer. This is, I said this to his chief of staff. Would Daryl Issa, want to store waste in something that couldn't be inspected or maintained? And, well, of course not. He said, that's common sense. You wouldn't want to do that. But that's what they're doing. So if you're going to try and get your elected officials to understand this and have them feel qualified, give them the car analogy so they can feel comfortable. Oh, okay. Give them the car analogy so they feel comfortable having an opinion. And you can't pick a technology, but you can pick requirements. You can say, we don't want this waste here, but while it's here, we want to make sure it can be inspected, maintained, and monitored to prevent leaks, not just tell us after they leak, but to prevent leaks. So it's a very simple thing. We've done city council resolutions with this. It's worked very effectively, and it's a way to raise awareness. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a close-up picture of the Diablo Canyon canister. They can't inspect them, but what they did is they took a couple of Diablo canisters, and that's one of the air vents near the top. And they went in there and they used some kind of a brush to brush. They never clean them, so they're full of dust particles and things. And they scraped some particles off to see if there was any salt, from the ocean. They found magnesium chloride, sea salt, which is one of the most corrosive things to stainless steel. They found some of that. And then they also found a temperature. They took the temperature of the parts of the canisters they could reach through that air vent, and they found the temperature was low enough that moisture would stay, and they call it deliquesce, kind of dissolve the salt, and that is one of the many triggers to start the cracking process in stainless steel. So that's our situation here, okay? Even little critters running on the surface can break that thing that makes stainless. And it has a unique granular structure that once a crack starts, it'll grow all the way through on its own. So, okay, next slide. Okay, and this is a quote from the president of Holtec. He came down a couple of times. We've got a video of him talking. So it's, everything I'm presenting here is not my information. And then if one of these leaks, they have no plan. I was at the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee yesterday. I asked the question, Linda Seeley asked us, what's your plan if there's a leak? They have no plan. And the NRC, the new regulatory, actually is going to allow them to destroy the spent fuel pools. We have this fight right now at San Onofre. They want to destroy the pools once they're empty. We need to stop that. The pools are the approved option in the technical specifications that they have from the NRC. It's the only approved option to unload a canister or repair a canister. So, and if you have a partial crack canister, it can't be transported, and they get rid of the pool, are they really planning to have this stuff go away? It doesn't sound like it. And I haven't seen this for Holtec yet, but what just happened about a week ago with at San Onofre is their vendor, Arriva, a new home center, they've submitted a request to the NRC to not only get rid of the pools, but they only want to have to measure radiation levels from the inlet air vent in the door. They do not want to have to measure radiation levels from the outlet air vent. You know, the canisters are in the overpack. They use convection cooling, where air comes in the bottom and it goes out the top. The hot air goes out. So you got a distribution system going like this. So so if you have a through-wall crack, the radiation, most of it's going to go through the outlet vent. Well, they don't want to have to measure that anymore. They only want to have to measure where the air goes in. So I don't know why else they would want to do that other than to be able to say we meet all NRC regulations. They only want to report peak radiation levels at the inland vent. So what I see here is a plan to hide leaks from us. Okay. Okay, we've got no early warning monitoring. They have temperature monitoring, but that by the time it gets too hot, it's too late. All right. So the rest of the world uses thick wall casts that don't have these problems. So let me see, what do I have here? Okay, oh wait a minute, I'm on a different slide. Okay, so they have no early warning monitoring. The only requirement, and what we confirmed yesterday, this is what PG&E does, somebody walks around once every 4 months with a monitor on a stick and checks the radiation levels. Now, the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee did not know that until I told them that yesterday, and they brought up the guy from PG&E, Strickland, and asked him, is that true? You only check radiation levels from these canisters once a quarter? And he danced around, but he finally admitted, yeah, it was true. Okay, and then after, when the plant shuts down and the pool's empty, the NRC allows him to get rid of all the radiation monitors around there, eliminates emergency planning. This is what they approve. Go to the next slide. Okay, now at Diablo Canyon, they actually loaded half of the fuel assemblies incorrectly. They were supposed to put the ones that cooled the longest on the outside and the hotter ones on the inside. You know, heat travels out, and they did it the opposite way, okay? Over like 2 or 3 loading periods. So what did the NRC do? No problem, we'll approve an exception. That's what they did. And I asked the manager over at the NRC, I said, why did you approve an exception? I mean, this was done for a reason, so that the fuel doesn't become damaged. And she says, well, we've determined that it's okay. And I said, well, how do you know it's okay? These things are welded shut. You don't know what's going on inside. And she just got quiet. But that's what they do. Okay, so go to the next slide. Okay, the NRC, when they approve a license, they give them a 20-year license. They ignore anything that happens after 20 years. So they do not even consider aging management when they give this approval. Unbelievable. I have this all in written evidence on all of this. And that they allow the pools to be, the NRC knows all these things, and yet they continue to do this. There's something called high burn-up fuel, and what that is, it's fuel that they allow to burn longer in the reactor. That makes them more money, but it makes the fuel over twice as radioactive and over twice as thermally hot. And they also know that it damages the rods. They call it fuel cladding, the zirconium rods. It damages those. And when you have damaged rods, it becomes brittle, so it's more likely to fail. And the NRC is still studying whether just train vibrations is going to cause the fuel cladding to fail because it's so brittle. They're still studying that. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is a California picture. Ours, San Onofre's been loaded, are 14 years old. Rancho Seco are the oldest in California, 16, then Diablo Canyon. So this is a relatively new technology. So we're just now starting to get to the point where we could have some major problems. So this is a now problem. So we need to solve this now. It's not like waiting for some long-term problem. Go to the next slide. Okay, the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world uses thick casts, thick wall casts, 10 to 19.75 inches thick. The 10-inch ones are the French Arriva model that were used also at Fukushima, and the 19.75 ones are a German model. They were ductile cast iron versus a carbon steel model. And you can look right here at the difference. You know, one's cracked, one's, you know, I mean, just, I don't need to read that to you. You can take a look at this list. And why are we using anything else? A one-word answer. Anybody? One word? Money, exactly. And I have a report from the DOE that they asked the utility, why did you pick this? Well, you know, we want to protect our ratepayer money. We want to, you know, we don't want to overspend their ratepayer money, you know. That's their reason, okay. They knew these things weren't going to last. But after 20 years, they were hoping it was going to be the federal government's problem. But it's our problem. So we need to be able to we need to be able to stop the loading of any more thin wall canisters. And we need to get the existing canisters loaded in thick wall casts. Okay, that's the only option that I see that we have. The industry was saying, well, you know, put it in dry storage. Fukushima survived and it was in dry storage. Well, guess what? They're thick wall casts. They're not these thin, you know, thin wall cans that we're using, you know. And then they inspected, they opened them up because they have bolted lids with metal seals. They have continuous monitoring. If there's a potential seal that needs to be replaced, they get an instant warning and then they can replace a seal. You know, a lot better replacing a seal than dealing with a through-wall crack you can't do anything with. So they're designed to be maintained. And they found out that the basket inside that holds those fuel assemblies, they were aluminum alloy. Well, these aren't going to last more than 60 years. So they banned the use of aluminum alloy baskets. So I contacted the NRC and I said, well, we have aluminum baskets. What about this discovery by Japan? Well, we'll get back to you, Dawn. And that was like 2 years ago. And I asked Senator California Edison, oh, we were waiting for the vendor to get back to us. So they're just ignoring this issue. And, okay, next slide. This is, you've seen this already from the previous one. This is a German model. You know, the United States has some thick wall casts, but they don't put them in buildings. What they did instead, to just show you kind of how bad we are in this country, what they did instead of putting it in a building, which provides environmental protection, all in addition to any security protection, they didn't want to cough up the money for a building. So they came up with this cap to go over the top because there's bolts in there. They put a cap over it and they set them outside. Well, they collected moisture under the cap. I mean, they took a good design and messed it up. So we have to, you know, so that's just another thing. But, you know, so this is, I work with material engineers, nuclear physicists, this is kind of considered like a model for the best available technology. So go ahead, go to the next slide. And all these are little abbreviations on the right. These are various countries that use this. You've got Japan, China, Belgium, the US, Germany. I forget what some of them are. Anyway, there's numerous countries that use this is the Arriva. There's also another chart for the German cast. So they're used all over for storage and transport. And The Thickwall cast design, it doesn't need a thin canister inside, and it's designed for storage and transport. So it's kind of like ready to roll. If you have the thick cast, you have everything. You have storage and you have a transport. With the thin wall canisters, they have to take that thin wall canister and put it in a transport cask and to transport it. And then they take the transport cask, they empty it, and then they haul the empty transport cask back to go pick up another one. That's a thin wall canister system. Anyway, next slide. In addition to having a license for your canister system, you need a license for your facility. So they call it an ISFSI, Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. So Diablo's license expires in 2024 for the site. So one strategy we have is to work with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's basically, they might as well call it the Nuclear Rubber Stamp Commission. It's a captured organization. But they're useful to sometimes stall at the federal level so you can get some things done at the state level or in another way. So one option that we have is to go to the Coastal Commission and try to get the Coastal Commission to not approve a renewal of this ISFSI license. Consolidated interim storage. There is a Shimkus bill, HR 3053, that all the elected officials, Democrat and Republicans, want to vote for. I listened to all the hearings in the Energy and Commerce Committee meeting. Not once did they mention that it removes the safety requirements out of the current law for both storage and transport. They didn't mention they're removing site-specific environmental requirements. Oversight of the DOE is removed. State, local, public rights to oversight, input, and transparency. Once they have an agreement, the idea is for interim storage, the licensee, which would be PG&E, would have an agreement, an MRS agreement with the Department of Energy to take over. They would take it on site. They don't have to just take it in transport now. This will allow them to actually transfer the license right where it is to the DOE, eliminating all PG liability. That's what this law will do, okay? I'm not saying they're going to do that, but that will be legal with this if this goes through as law. Let's see, removes state rights to, federal, state, and local rights, land, utilities, etc. In the permanent repository section, they basically can take the land, the utilities, and last I heard, water is a utility. So for the western states, this is a precedent-setting big deal. They did not pick this up in that energy commerce bill. I spent 2.5 days with this bill analyzing it so I could find, all the problems with it. So that's still in there, okay? Safety issues. No, they don't have to do any cost analysis. They don't have to deal with safety, transport infrastructure safety issues before they pick a site. And there's never been any funding source for interim storage. We have the money that they took from us for a permanent repository is a nuclear waste fund. That money is supposed to be for the permanent repository. There was no money, there's been no money raised for interim storage. So this is going to end up requiring an allocation from Congress to safely store the waste. Now, this is how the DOE lives with, the DOE manages defense waste right now. Hanford, Savannah River, number of other places. They are reliant on what Congress is willing to give them to maintain that waste, okay? Every site they have is leaks. They have liquid waste and tanks. In Hanford and Washington, it's leaking into the Columbia River. Savannah River has tanks that are leaking and they don't have enough money to replace them. So I'm not real thrilled with the idea of turning this over to Congress and the DOE. I don't see that as a good plan. Okay, let's go to the next one. Next. Okay, so yeah, I think I was kind of covering this ahead of time. And the CPUC, I intervened in the Public Utility Commission proceeding, this decommissioning proceeding, to try and stop Edison from getting their hands on money to buy more canisters. However, so I gave her, I made a cost-based case of why it's going to be that they don't have enough money because these things are going to need to be replaced in the short term, and there's no money for that. So I made a cost-based case, nothing to do with radiation. The judge said that my case was meretricious, but out of scope for this proceeding. So they gave him the money anyway. Okay. So anyway, okay. Because of the high burn of fuel, because there's hydrides, gases that are created from the high burn of fuel in the uranium, in the zirconium cladding, if the air gets to that, you could have an explosion. So we may need to have what's a hot cell to unload this and put it in bigger, better casts. So that needs to be further evaluated, but from my research, that's what it appears that we need because of this high burn of fuel that's got all the hydride buildup. So that could use some more research, but from what I've read, I'm pretty comfortable that's what we need. They don't have one, they're very expensive, but at this point, they've made a mess for us and it's gonna be expensive to clean it up. So I don't see how we have a choice. That would be the safest way to do it, okay? And so, we need to organize. We have, I'm sure, it looks like, I think we have a lot of smart people in here. Well, you showed up to this, so. So I would love to work with anyone that wants to get more involved. As you can see, that there's not a lot of people that are interested in this. We can brainstorm, strategize together. I'm working with Mothers for Peace. We're trying to bring North and South, all of California together. We have the same problem here, and see what we can come up with. We have to do this. Some people say, we can't do this. We have to do this. I didn't think when we worked on getting San Onofre shut down, I didn't think we could succeed, but we had to do it. I mean, they actually leaked radiation and wanted to restart a broken reactor. I didn't think we'd win, but we did. So it can be done. And I've never taken on the nuclear industry before or energy utility before. And it was a group effort, but it worked. And so I learned a lot from that, what works and what helps. So, it would be really great to get more people involved in this effort because that will help us succeed. And if you want to learn more, let's see, what do I have next? Slide? Yeah, so go to sanonofresafety.org. There's my email address, all the information. I've got a lot more stuff on the website. It's designed to be a self-serve systems for citizens, anybody that wants to get involved. It's got sample resolutions you can take to your city council and sample letters. Start at the city level, you get them educated, get some press because you have a resolution so there's a lot of different vehicles. So I'm hoping some people after hearing this will want to get more involved and not just move to New Zealand. Okay. Thank you for showing up.
And thank you, Molly Johnson, for giving us such a great